On January 24, 1989, Theodore Robert Bundy was executed by electric chair at Florida State Prison. He was one of America's most notorious serial killers, responsible for the murders of at least 30 young women across 7 states. But here's what made Bundy different from every other serial killer you've heard about. He wasn't some deranged loner living in his mother's basement. He was charming, intelligent, and devastatingly handsome. He worked at a crisis hotline, studied law, and even campaigned for political candidates. To the outside world, Ted Bundy was the perfect man. But behind that flawless facade lurked something far more sinister. This is the story of how one man fooled an entire nation and became the blueprint for every fictional serial killer that followed. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how Bundy's mind worked, why his charm was so deadly, and how he manipulated everyone around him for over a decade. But first, let me paint you a picture of just how convincing this man really was. In 1974, a young woman named Carol Daranch was approached by a clean-cut man in a shopping mall parking lot. He identified himself as Officer Roseland and told her that someone had attempted to break into her car. He was polite, well-dressed, and spoke with authority. Carol had no reason not to trust him. This stranger led her toward what he claimed was his police vehicle. It wasn't until she was already inside that she realized something was terribly wrong. That stranger was Ted Bundy, and Carol Daranch became one of the few women who escaped his trap alive. See, what made Bundy so dangerous wasn't just his willingness to kill. It was his supernatural ability to appear completely normal, even trustworthy. He understood something that most criminals never figure out. People don't just look at your actions, they look at how you present yourself. And Bundy had mastered the art of presentation better than anyone. Let's start with his childhood, because the warning signs were there from the very beginning. Theodore Robert Bundy was born in 1946 to an unwed mother named Eleanor Louise Cowell. In the 1940s, having a child out of wedlock was considered deeply shameful. So Eleanor moved in with her parents and pretended that Ted was her younger brother rather than her son. For the first few years of his life, Ted believed his grandparents were his parents and his mother was his sister. When Ted was just 3 years old, something happened that should have terrified everyone around him. His aunt was taking a nap when she woke up to find kitchen knives arranged in a circle around her bed, all pointing directly at her. Standing next to the bed was little Ted Bundy, smiling sweetly at her as if he'd just given her a present. Most children that age are afraid of sharp objects. Ted was fascinated by them. As he grew older, the disturbing behavior continued but became more sophisticated. He started peeping through windows as a teenager, watching unsuspecting women in their homes. He shoplifted constantly, not because his family couldn't afford things, but because he enjoyed the thrill of taking what wasn't his. And here's the crucial part that everyone missed. Ted was incredibly good at hiding these activities. He came from a religious family, so he learned early how to present one face to the world while keeping his true nature completely hidden. The mask really started to form during his teenage years. Ted was obsessed with appearing successful and sophisticated. He studied how wealthy, educated people spoke and behaved, then copied their mannerisms perfectly. He became a master of what psychologists call impression. Every interaction was management. Every conversation carefully calculated to make people see exactly what he wanted them to see. But underneath that carefully crafted exterior, something much darker was developing. At 18, Ted fell deeply in love with a college student who came from the kind of wealthy, prestigious family he desperately wanted to be part of. When she broke up with him, telling friends that he lacked direction and seemed to lie about small things constantly, something inside Ted snapped. The rejection didn't just hurt him, it enraged him, and that rage would eventually fuel a killing spree that lasted for years. By the early 1970s, Ted had transformed himself into what appeared to be the ideal American man. He was studying law, volunteering at a crisis hotline where he counseled suicidal callers, and working on political campaigns. Everyone who met him described him the same way: charming, intelligent, helpful, and incredibly handsome. He was the kind of man that parents hoped their daughters would bring home. But behind closed doors, Ted was nurturing increasingly violent fantasies. He consumed massive amounts of pornography, escalated his peeping activities, and began planning something far more sinister. The helpful law student who spent his days counseling people in crisis was simultaneously developing detailed plans for abduction, torture, and murder. What made Bundy's transformation so chilling was how methodical it became. By 1973, he had developed what could only be described as a hunting system. He would drive around college campuses and residential areas in his tan Volkswagen Beetle, scouting for potential victims. But this wasn't random violence. Bundy had a very specific type that he targeted, and the psychology behind his victim selection reveals something deeply disturbing about his motivations. Almost all of his victims were young women with long dark hair parted down the middle. They were college students, attractive, and often described by friends as kind and trusting. This wasn't a coincidence. Bundy was essentially recreating the and over again same woman over woman who had rejected him years earlier. Every murder was, in a twisted way, his attempt to gain control over that original source of humiliation and rage. His approach was devastatingly effective because it exploited something fundamental about human nature. Bundy understood that people, especially women, are conditioned from childhood to be helpful and polite. So he created elaborate scenarios designed to trigger that conditioning. He would wear a fake cast on his arm or leg and struggle to carry books to his car, asking passing women for assistance. He would pretend to be a police officer, a security guard, or someone in authority who needed help with an investigation. The genius of these tactics was that they put his victims in situations where refusing to help would feel rude or suspicious. What woman wants to ignore someone who appears to be injured and struggling? What person wants to refuse a police officer's request for assistance? Bundy weaponized basic human decency against his victims, and it worked almost every time. Once he had lured a victim close to his vehicle, the facade would drop instantly. He had pre-installed handcuffs and restraints in his Beetle, hidden from view but easily accessible. He would strike his victims with a crowbar or tire iron, incapacitate them, and transport them to remote locations he had scouted in advance. Everything was planned, calculated, and executed with the precision of someone who had studied every possible variable. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Bundy's crimes wasn't the murders themselves, but what happened afterward. He would often return to the bodies days or even weeks later, sometimes grooming the hair, applying makeup, or simply spending time with the corpses. He took photographs and kept personal items as trophies. This behavior reveals something crucial about his psychology. For Bundy, the murders weren't just about killing. They were about achieving total, permanent control over another human being. The level of compartmentalization Bundy achieved was almost supernatural. During the day, he would attend law at the school classes, work crisis hotline, and maintain relationships with friends and romantic partners. His girlfriend Elizabeth Klopfer lived with him for years and later described him as loving, attentive, and completely normal. His co-workers saw him as dedicated and empathetic. His professors viewed him as a promising law student with a bright future. Ted Bundy's story serves as the ultimate reminder that evil rarely announces itself with horns and a pitchfork. It walks among us wearing a charming smile, speaking in soothing tones, and offering help when we need it most. The man who fooled judges, journalists, and even mental health professionals proves that our most dangerous predators aren't the obvious monsters lurking in dark alleys. They're the ones we invite into our lives, the ones we trust, and the ones we never see coming until it's far too late.